Ukraine has imposed new sanctions against companies and individuals who assist Russia in producing missiles and drones, as well as against entities in the financial sector and crypto market that help circumvent restrictions. Dozens of individuals and legal entities have come under sanctions, including suppliers of components and crypto platforms. Some of these sanctions are planned to be included in the 20th package of sanction restrictions by the European Union. Now, we will delve into this complex crypto topic, including crypto sanctions. Oleh Pendzyn is with us live. He's a member of the Economic Discussion Club. Greetings to you, Mr. Oleh.
Yes, greetings to you as well.
Up until today, I have repeatedly heard about these loopholes, crypto loopholes, that Russia uses to keep money there and somehow receive it. So, am I right in understanding that with our progress and with the 20th in the package, there's also a separate section about crypto, about the financial sector? What about these loopholes? Are they being closed off? Are they being completely shut down? What is happening? What will happen?
They are, as a rule, of a personal nature. That is, wherever specific wallets, specific exchanges, or specific crypto market participants are identified as being involved in financing the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation, the measures are applied directly to them. Both individuals and legal entities are subject to the corresponding sanctions restrictions. In general, it is impossible to ban the crypto market entirely because it operates under somewhat different rules. But personal sanctions against specific market participants who help Russians circumvent sanctions restrictions, those are absolutely real. And these sanctions apply to them as both individuals and legal entities. Because yes, it's crypto, but still, people are already converting crypto. Then it turns into real money, and people live off that, earn income, and pay the appropriate taxes. Consequently, in this manner, by imposing these sanctions, extraordinarily difficult conditions are created, specifically for those who help Russians bypass sanctions.
I want to touch on this 20th package as well, because there, besides cryptos and platforms that helped move capital out or pay for smuggling, regarding the restrictions that will be imposed there, there is now the possibility to penalize banks in China, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey if they process prohibited payments. And supposedly this should force banks to refuse transactions for Russians due to the risk of losing access to the European market. So, does that mean there weren't such restrictions before?
No, look at this. There were restrictions before as well. But let me repeat once again. What we're talking about now is the personalization of the impact of the existing sanctions restrictions. That is, when restrictions are imposed on Chinese banks, there is concrete evidence of transactions with Russian companies, and the names of those banks that likely carried out these operations are specifically listed. That's one. Second point. The circle of sanctioned individuals from the Russian Federation is expanding. So how does the Russian Federation operate? If a company gets exposed in a negative way and comes under sanctions, they simply create a brand new parallel company through which they process the necessary payments. And this new company exists only until it too comes under sanctions. So the broader the circle of sanctioned entities, the less likely it is that the Russians will be able to quickly send the necessary payments. You need to understand the following. China doesn't do anything for free. If Russia wants to obtain dual-use goods that are under sanctions, they have to pay for certain things. So as a matter of fact, this very payment mechanism is subject to the rigorous and strict control of every sanctions package that we are currently discussing with you.
Now, moving on to the situation currently unfolding directly within Russia. The day before yesterday, I saw these figures in the media, flashy headlines. But I want to understand how true this is. What are the actual results for January? The deficit in Russia's economy is 1.7 trillion, I think, rubles, while the total annual deficit that was planned was 3.7 trillion. And this supposedly is evidence that this is not a good place, and the direction in which the economy is heading is very close to that. Furthermore, a number of your own economic experts are also currently writing about the possibility of a second wave, or a second round of recession that Russia is entering. So where is it now? Where does it stand with its economy?
All right, look. First of all, I would say let's not fool ourselves with any illusions right now.
I'm not fooling myself.
So, in December, In order to reduce the overall annual deficit, the Russians postponed 75% of local Russian Federation finances, 75% of the payments they were supposed to make in December, to the next year, to January. This allowed them to fit within a 5.6 trillion deficit. But this resulted in a substantial and noticeable increase in the deficit figures recorded for the month of January. So essentially, that $1 trillion plus some additional change that the Russians reported for January, really ought to have been officially documented as appearing in December. And the real deficit there should have been close to 7 trillion, not the 5.6 they're talking about now. That's the point. In other words, they simply moved those payments to January. This will undoubtedly worsen the situation for 2026, but the main issue here is something else. The main question is, how much revenue will they actually have? So all of those extensive discussions for our viewers about the rate of GDP growth, the total volume, the number of businesses opened, and overdue loan debts, these are all very impressive and interesting statistical figures. But when we actually start talking about the actual underlying condition and current state of the Russian economy, we really need to understand the following. 35% of Russia's budget revenue comes from oil sales. The smaller the volume of oil they sell, the less money they can send to their ongoing military efforts. And any actions currently aimed at reducing Russia's ability to utilize its shadow tanker fleet and the 20th package of sanctions is set to intensify the pressure and tighten the regulatory screws even further in this area, as well as any actions related to reducing the oil purchases made by India. Instead of Russian oil, India is ready to buy Venezuelan oil, and the Americans are actively pushing for this. The sale by American investment companies of their foreign assets in coal for $22 billion, which will prevent the Russians from importing Russian oil and selling it through their own processing companies in Europe. There are 5,000 gas stations there. At one point, the Kovalevskis had that many. All these measures reduce the Russians' physical ability to sell oil on the world market and therefore decrease the amount of revenue going into the Russian budget. That is the most important thing about this situation. The less revenue they have, the bigger the deficit will be, and the fewer opportunities Russians will have to spend money on.
Against the backdrop of the ongoing war, a Russian media outlet published an article today citing a very important CEO and insurance broker. He reports that the total losses suffered by Russian oil companies from strikes on their refineries have now officially exceeded 1 trillion rubles. This massive financial figure highlights the growing impact of the conflict on the nation's energy sector and its economic stability. And overall, the impact is very significant. Both exports are falling, and the current economic system just can't cope. In addition to this, I would also like to mention the significant Reuters report that Indian refineries are now actively refusing to purchase any new oil at this time. Russian oil, which is supposed to be supplied under new contracts. So you can imagine what the forecast for losses will be in 2026? At this current moment, because it's still completely uncertain how many more refineries will be targeted or impacted, or what might happen with other infrastructure issues.
Again, so there are no unnecessary illusions. I'll say the following. About a week ago, Dmitry Alcoholic Medvedev, he was very complimentary on social media, talking about how good the economic situation is. At the moment, this mechanism exists in North Korea. Consider how effectively the entire system functions, how efficiently it creates additional labor, and how precisely it allocates the funds needed for building missiles and the nuclear program. Look, if there simply isn't enough money left over for social spending, it's quite likely that Russia will have to make some very difficult choices. Turn into a giant gulag. But it won't be able to finance the war, so it's important to understand the following. The only mechanism currently available to protect Ukraine from the aggressor is the strength and capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces. It's probably not worth expecting any major dramatic events in the Russian Federation in an ordinary year. Yes, they will become even more like North Korea. Yes, they will introduce labor armies. Yes, people will be imprisoned for every little thing. But because of that, Russia will not spend less money on the war. It's not like in that joke. Dad, will you drink less? No, you will eat less. That's actually the very scenario that Russia might well face in 2026.
And as for us, regarding funding in 2026, money for the economy, for financing the army. As I understand it, so far there are no issues. Everything is covered.
90 billion euros. We were given that for 2 years. The remaining credit is 50 billion, and of what we received in 2024, $26 billion is still there. Work with the International Monetary Fund continues. There are a number of specific and concerning issues related to the memorandum. It appears that not every detail within the document is as transparent as we would like. There are significant and deeply troubling problems there, including, but certainly not limited to, very unpopular decisions within the country, but these are working matters. Overall, we see our partners' willingness to continue financing Ukraine to help us wage war against the aggressor.
Thank you, Mr. Oleh, for these clarifications and for taking the time to join our broadcast. Oleh Pendzyn, a member of the Economic Discussion Club, was live with us via video link from our studio.